On the afternoon of January 27, 1993, the captain of the Judicial Organic Police of 311, Don Santiago Ibanez, gave the order to Sergeant Morena Alegre to go to Catarroja, to Camino Real Street number 101, 4th floor, to proceed upon the arrest of Enrique Angles. Martin's name and address that appeared on the papers found in the vicinity of La Romana grave. Said sergeant went to the home with a team of 5 agents from said judicial police and the support of the civil guard of Catarroja, upon arriving and mounting an operation below it, on the roof, and in the surrounding areas. They proceed to knock intensely on the door, both on the bell and by knocking on it repeatedly. From inside the home no one answers, but the agents hear noises and footsteps. Seeing that the tenants of the same did not agree to open in a friendly manner, the sergeant decides to request a court order for the entry, search of the home, and arrest of Enrique Angles to court number 2 of Catarroja. The Sergeant Morena Alegre and Captain Ibanez go to the court to collect said order, according to what they say. When they leave the operation to monitor the home, and in the surrounding area, when they return they verify that the tenants had already voluntarily opened the door. Inside the house at that time were the wanted Enrique Angles, his mother Nosa, his sister Kelly, and her boyfriend, as both Enrique and his mother Nosa later reported. At the time the civil guard arrived. In his house, apart from the 4 of them, there was also his brother, Antonio Angles, who, upon seeing that the agents were knocking on the door, was the one who barred it and took the opportunity to escape by jumping from the window, making an oblique jump a few feet away. Roofs that are difficult to access and 2 stories high. But let's leave the escape to Antonio Angles for the next chapter, and let's focus on the arrests and statements of those detained that day. Nosa, the mother of the family, stayed in the house as the owner while the agents carried out the search. During said search, 3 young people burst in. 2 of them Nosa's sons and Enrique's brothers, and a third, a friend of the family who lived temporarily at the home, called Miguel Ricard Tarrega. According to what they say, he came from picking up a puppy for Antonio and some tangerines for Nosa. When they arrive at the building, and according to his statements, they see several cars and civil guard officers at the portal, and according to Miguel Ricard, it is not strange to him, since the Angles home was a place well known to the authorities, and in which searches and arrests were often carried out, for reasons of drugs. In fact, he says that he thought they were looking for Antonio Angles, since he had an arrest warrant for not having returned to prison after leaving it with a permit. He also says that when he sees so many civil guards, at no time does he feel uneasy, and that he enters the building and home because there is no arrest warrant on him, nor does he have any fear for any incident, which if so, he would be fled. Once they break into the apartment, according to Miguel Ricard's statements, they are asked who they are. Upon identifying themselves, they separate him, is handcuffed facing the wall. After asking what is happening, they tell him to shut up and stay calm, while they finish the search of the home. Curiously, during this process, the house phone rang, and when it was not answered, the answering machine that Kelly had in his bedroom went on, recording the following message.
Kelly, soy yo, Rubén. Cuando vengas le dices al rubio que vaya a donde está el plato y la maneta de la moto, y que traigan los 2 sacos de dormir y los quesos y la leche que está encima de la nevera, ¿sabes? Y eso, cuanto antes posible. Vale, Dios, luego.
After hearing this, and according to the statements of Miguel Ricard, a civil guard agent picks him up and takes him to the kitchen, asks him about a handle and a plate from a motorcycle. He says that he doesn't know anything about that, and the agents begin to search the home for said plate and suitcase. During this process, he comments that they remove the handcuffs, which they place on Mauricio, since he had had his hair dyed dark for a few months. At that moment, enters another agent and says, "What are you doing? This is the blonde," pointing at Ricard. And then they put those handcuffs on him again, and according to their own statements they say, taking him into custody just in case. From there, he is also transferred to the Patraix barracks. According to the statements of Captain Ibanez, this event occurred in a different way. As he relates, he went out after the search to the dining room, and one of his agents approached him and told him that there was an individual who was going to the Angles house, and that he went up alone, spoke to him and said, "Why are you coming here?" And he answered, "I'm a friend of the family." To which asked him, "And what do you have in your bag?" The boy replied, some oranges that I stole from a nearby field. According to the captain, he looked like a blonde, and it sounded something related to the tape we had listened. So I asked him, "What car do you have?" And the boy answered, "A white Opel Corsa." To which I asked him, "Do you have any problem coming to the police station? Let us have some questions." And he said he had no problem, and he accompanied us of his own free will. Once at the Patrex barracks, the detainees Enrique Anglès, Kelly Anglès, and her boyfriend began to give statements. We are going to go over their statements, emphasizing only the important data to finally focus on those carried out by Miguel Ricard, who, after all, was the only one who went to prison for this crime. The first to testify was Kelly, and she did so on January 27, 1993 at 11 p.m. According to what she states, she did not hear the knocks of the civil guard because she was tired and was in the back room sleeping. Wakes up once the agents have entered, that only her mother, her brother Enrique, her boyfriend, and her were in the home, and that she does not remember since when she has not seen her brother Antonio, but that it has been a long time, that his other brother, Enrique, is mentally ill, and that he is not aggressive, that if he does not take medication he has delusions, but that he is incapable of harming anyone, and does not remember where he was on November 13th, 1992, but that at that time, he was in the Bétera Psychiatric Hospital, and that the blonde is named Miguel Ricard. The next to testify was Kelly's boyfriend, José Antonio Garcia, on January 27, 1993, at around 11:40 at night. He stated that he woke up when he heard loud knocks on the door, and when he got up to open the door, he observes that it is blocked with a board, which he removes and proceeds to open it. He agrees with Kelly in relating the people who were in the home at that time, and who also does not remember how long it has been since he saw Antonio Anglès. Also mentions that his brother-in-law Enrique is not violent, and that in November 1992, he was in the Bétera Psychiatric Hospital. That same night, Miguel Ricard declares, "But we are going to bring together his statements and tell them later." After this statement, both Kelly and her boyfriend are released. And on January 28th at 11:45 in the morning, the civil guard takes a statement from Kelly Anglès again. During this statement, she says she found out that her brother Antonio Anglès is escaped from prison by the agents who does not recognize Antonio's voice in the answering machine message, and says that he names her because in the welcome message on the answering machine quotes, "Hello, I'm Kelly." He also presents a photocopy of the medical report, signed by the clinical head of Area Number 13 of Catarroja, which states that Enrique Anglès Martins suffers from schizophrenia combined with medium-type oligophrenia. On January 28th at 12:30 noon, a statement was taken from Nusa Martins. She said that she works in a poultry slaughterhouse and that she arrived home around 8:30 or 9, and her son was there, Antonio Anglès, who is rarely around the house due to his escape from prison and who usually only stays a day or two. That Kelly and her boyfriend arrived in the afternoon. That she is half deaf and I don't hear the knock on the door to the civil guard. And she does not know who was able to block said door. She does not remember where Antonio could be on November 13th, 1992, but she is sure that yesterday he was at home. Until now, Nusa is the only one who mentions that Antonio Anglès was at the family home that same day. On January 29th, 1993, at 8:20 in the afternoon, a statement was taken from Enrique Anglès Martins. When asked if he was at the area's La Fe Hospital on January 14th, 1992, for treatment of gonorrhea, as cause in the papers found in the grave, he says that last year he was in La Fe for a head treatment, that they put rubber bands connected to a machine that stung. Asked if he was in said hospital on the day mentioned now 1:09 in the morning. He says he doesn't remember it, that he was there again because he got a wound in his arm and went to the outpatient clinic. And from there they took him to the hospital. That he doesn't know what gonorrhea is, that he doesn't believe that his brother make use of his medical record because his other brother Carlos has been undergoing treatment for a psychiatric illness at that time. That the last day he saw his brother Antonio was the same day that he was arrested. That doesn't know where he left because when the civil guard entered he was sleeping. That he was at the Loro nightclub with him one day at the exit of Picassent. That they traveled there on a Honda motorcycle driven by his brother. That they consumed a bottle of champagne and has not seen again. I also declare that the blonde has been living in his house for a year. That Antonio uses his card and his identity card. That he asked for it because since he is wanted, to impersonate him if he was arrested, and that it is currently in his possession. That the date of birth that appears on the papers found in the grave does not correspond with his, but with that of his brother Antonio, who does not remember where he was during the month of November, and specifically on the 13th of the year 1992, that he never goes, neither with Antonio nor with the blonde. That once his brother showed up with some jars of pure honey, collected from some hives, that he is afraid of his brother Antonio. That once he hit his mother, and when he stood in the middle he hit him badly too. That his brother and the blonde dye their hair, and that they use the same dye, that his brother carries a knife about 9 centimeters long. As we can see after this statement, Enrique Angles also mentions that his brother Antonio was at the home that same day. And now we are going to give way to Miguel Ricard's statements, which he made in the civil guard quarters, and those carried out before the investigating judge of the case. At 12:50 p.m. on January 28, 1993, the first statement was taken from Miguel Ricard, in which he said that on the evening of January 27th, he went to his friend Nosa's house, with the sole purpose of visiting her, checking on her and giving her a bag of tangerines, who upon entering the home saw several civil guards, that they have transferred him to the Patrick's barracks to testify about some facts. Asked how long he has known Enrique Angles, he says that for a long time, about 10 or 12 years, that this person is harmless, that he is sick in the head, and all he does is say nonsenses. When asked where he was in November 1992, he commented that in November and part of December, he was imprisoned in the Valencia prison. Asked if he has a vehicle, he says yes, a white Opel Corsa, but he doesn't remember the license plate numbers. Asked if he usually transports Enrique in his car, he says that he thinks he only did it once to take him to a psychiatric hospital. Asked how long it has been since he has seen Antonio Angles, comments that since he had the prison permit, since he escaped from prison he has not seen him again. He says that he does not know the area of Lombay and Catadao, that he does not know those towns. They ask him if he has had documents from Enrique Angles, or if he has transported them. And he says yes, that he was arranging a social security payment for him, but that he never lost any of his documents. Asked if he knows if Antonio Angles has had any contact with his sister Kelly, he says that he does not know. Asked if Enrique has any sexual deviation or sexual attraction to teenagers, he declares no. He says that he has not lent his car to anyone, and that while he was in jail, he left the car with the woman he lived with, and that on the 13th, it was supposed to be on the street where he left it parked. Comments that Enrique Angles is incapable of driving or transporting 3 teenagers in a vehicle. That although he is crazy, he does not consider him aggressive or capable of killing anyone, but that his brother Antonio already had a violent case. In one occasion tied a woman with a chain to a post, and there he brutally beat her, and for that case, he was arrested. Tipo. Since he saw how Antonio gave that brutal beating to that woman called Nuria, he did nothing to prevent it, nor denounce him, and repeats that he has not known Antonio's whereabouts since he escaped from prison. Asked if he has ever left the Opel Corsa with Antonio, he answers yes, that he once left it before going to prison. Asked if he knows a certain Ruben, he says yes, that he knows a Ruben who lives in Alcasser, who was also arrested when Antonio beat up Nuria, whose name is Ruben Dario, and is about 27 years old, single, tall, blonde, and who doesn't know where he works. Asked if Antonio Angles has any sexual tendency towards teenagers, he says that unknown, but that he is very aggressive and capable of doing anything. Here ends his first statement, as we can see in this one. He doesn't mention anything about the crime, but just before the end of the day, and to everyone's surprise, Miguel Ricard comes back and he asks to testify once again and gives a new twist to the case by acknowledging the crimes. On January 28th at 11:55 p.m., his statement was taken again, and in this he said, on the afternoon of November 13th, 1992, he was with Antonio in the Seat Ronda on the way to the Cooler nightclub. And during the journey they passed the 3 young women. Antonio, who was heading to the aforementioned nightclub, told them that he would take them, to which the girls agreed by riding in the back before arriving. Antonio tells them that it is early, that if they want to go for a drink, and they answer that if they are invited, yes, they pass by the nightclub and continue towards Montreuil and Real de Montreuil. And before arriving at Lombay, Antonio told him to go down a path on the side of the road. During this trip, the witness says that he believes that Antonio knows the young women beforehand, due to the conversation that he has with them, and once they had driven about 5 kilometers, they stop the car, and Antonio gets out of the car with Tony and leaves away about 100 meters, where he cannot see them. After a while, he returns and leaves with Miriam, moving Desiree to the front seat, having a conversation with him at some point, and they decide to have sex, which they do anally. Antonio arrives a little after they finish and tells Desiree to come with him, that one of his friends was feeling ill. She accompanies him while he stays in the vehicle. After about 20 minutes, he hears 3 shots, with a separation between them of about 2 seconds. After this, Antonio approaches the car and threatens him that if he says anything he will kill him. He starts the vehicle and they head to the Alcásser booth, pick up a pickaxe and a carpet. It takes them about an hour or an hour and a half to reach the place where the bodies were. At approximately 2:30 a.m., they load the bodies into the seat ronda, folding the rear seats and placing them between the seats and the trunk. Antonio gets into the driver's seat and heads towards La Romana. When they arrive, he gets off and begins to dig the grave with his pickaxe. Once finished, he throws the corpses one on top of the other and covers it with dirt. Finishing this, they get in the car and head to Antonio's house in Catarroja, the detainee emphasizing that during the trip he is threatened again. If he tells anything about what happened, he will kill him. He declares that the pistol is a 9mm Star, which he was hiding in the Albarach shed, among some bushes inside a glove, that the girls were dressed when they buried them. And this statement ends at 1:55 p.m. In this first statement acknowledging the crimes, we can see how the damage caused to the girls on the autopsies does not coincide with the act that he says in said statement. In addition, he tiptoes around, accusing himself of almost nothing, and placing the entire weight of the crimes against someone that cannot deny or accept these accusations, because he is not detained. But we still have more. The next day, Miguel Ricard's statement is taken again, and he adds some more data. These already coincide with some of the damage that the bodies present. This statement occurs on January 29th at 11:45 p.m. and quotes that, on November 13th, 1992, they finished eating around 3 in the afternoon at Noosa's house. They were at the home until 8, and they left in the white Opel Corsa that he was driving. That just before leaving was half drunk and dazed. They headed towards Picassent, and passing through the park they picked up 3 girls, emphasizing that the car used was the Opel Corsa, and not the Seat Ronga. Since that they didn't buy this one until Christmas, that he didn't know the girls, and that he doesn't know if Antonio knew them. They asked if they were going to Cooler Club, and he answered yes. When the girls realize that he is passing the nightclub and don't stop, they get nervous, and one of them asks where they are going. And Antonio answers that he is going to pick up a thing, and that it would take long. It also states that Antonio, due to their nervousness, hits Miriam in the mouth with the butt of the gun, and that he ties the hands of both Miriam and Tony, that they pass through Montreuil, Montserrat, the Real de Montreuil, and Lombay, and that on that journey they didn't stop. Antonio told him to turn right onto a dirt road. After about 5 or 10 minutes, they stopped when they arrived to an old factory, which he parked next to a corner wall, that Antonio grabbed Antonia, walking towards a path about 150 meters away. That to take her, he grabbed her and told her, "Let's talk." That immediately afterward he heard screams from the girl asking for help and telling her to leave her, that she wouldn't say anything. Her friends asked what was happening. Desiree got out and moved to the front seat. Immediately Antonio arrived saying that the girl was feeling sick and took Miriam, while Miguel stayed making out with Desiree without using force with her, although she didn't want to, but he convinced her. They did it by lowering her pants just a little, and he helped her to lift her shirt and push her bra up, which passed about 3 or 4 hours, until Antonio returned and took Desiree, who, when he took her, he did it more forcefully. She asked him, screaming, what was happening, and after about half an hour she heard the shots. At this moment he got out of the car and observed the 3 dead girls with their hands tied, that Antonio hit them with a stick after they were dead, that there was a lot of blood, and that he even got his pants stained with said blood, having to burn them later, that there was not much light, but that Antonio carried a pocket flashlight, that he was in the Opel Corsa, that Antonio took some pliers from the trunk when he left with Antonia, that the 3 of them had their pants around their ankles, and that between the 2 of them placed them in their place. They get in the car and go to the Albarach booth for a hoe and a pickaxe, and once they have collected this, they go to Lombay, and at the Lombay booth they took the carpet. They put the carpet in the car and returned to where the bodies were. They spread the carpet in the back of the trunk, and on it they placed the bodies, which they transported from where they were to the car, one by one. Antonio looks for the shell casings with a flashlight. Also, Antonio drive, and he throw away the seat, goes back and goes to sleep. And when they arrive at La Romana, Antonio tells him we are going to dig a grave. He digging with the hoe and Antonio with the pickaxe. Once finished, he says that they will introduce the girls one by one, This statement is more in line with some of the injuries that the young women presented, such as blows with blunt objects, hand ligatures, and some other things. But it is still very far from explaining everything that said bodies will present. On January 30th, 1993, and before the judge, he gave an even more detailed statement. Statement reads, he has lived in the Anglès house since last summer of 1992, due to the great friendship that unites him with Roberto Anglès. And since then, he began to have more of a relationship with Antonio. With him, he began to go out, both to clubs and going to the mountain huts of Lambe and Albarache. That Antonio had been continuously using the Lambe hut since he escaped from prison to hide, but that lately he had been spending more time at the family home. So he was generally in Cattaraugia on weekends, that the white Opel Corsa is his property, and he bought it second-hand around the month of August 92, that Antonio, since November 92, began using the name Ruben, that on the day of the events, on Friday, November 13th, 1992, he ate at Antonio's house in Cattaraugia, and around 7 or 8 in the afternoon they left the house with the intention of going to party at the Arabesco nightclub. However, Antonio told him about going to Picassent Cooler, where there was a lot of partying, deciding to go there on the way, that he was driving the Opel Corsa that he owned. He did not know that Antonio was carrying a firearm that day, which was normally hidden in the Albarache booth, already driving in Picassent, and at the height of the park. They saw 3 girls hitchhiking. At that moment, Antonio told him to stop. Antonio asked the girls if they were going to the Cooler nightclub. They answered yes. So Antonio got out of the car and downcast, the front seat. The 3 young women got into the back seat, Antonio getting back into the front seat. Once they resumed their march, and just before reaching Cooler, Antonio gets close to the declarant's ear and tells him not to stop, that they would go have something to drink, answering that it's okay. So when they reached the height of the nightclub, they continued the march. The girls asked why they didn't stop, to which Antonio declared that they were going to pick up something and that it wouldn't take long, to which the girls agreed if it wasn't too far away. Faced with this statement, Miguel says that he was upset, since the decision to go out for a drink did not agree with the lie told to the girls. Once they had passed the housing developments, the girls realized that what he had said was not true, and began to protest. Then Antonio took out his gun and threatened them. Then one of them began to scream. Then Antonio turned back, knelt on his seat, and taking the gun by the butt, hit one of the girls, who could not say which one it was, although he is sure it was not Desiree. After hitting them with the gun, Antonio left the arm in his seat, and with his hand, and in a state of great excitement, he began to hit them on the head. It is assumed that he hit the 3 girls at the same time. He shouted at them and ordered them to be quiet, and from then on only the 3 of them were heard crying in a low voice. The deponent did nothing, and continued driving at about 80 kilometers per hour, because he was completely afraid of what Antonio could do to him, since he thought that if he defended the young woman he could shoot him. He continued driving in total silence, until the crossroads of the Venta Cabrera, where Antonio told him to turn left, which is the road that goes to Montreuil and Real de Montreuil, reaching the height of Catadau, arriving at the crossroads of the road. Antonio told him to turn to the right and take the dirt road there, driving along it for about 5 or 10 minutes at about 40 kilometers per hour until reaching a type of factory and ordering Antonio to stop. During the journey, he remembers that after Antonio hit and slapped the young women, he took out of the glove compartment a type of gauze that belonged to him and that he used to cover a tattoo that he had on his arm. He proceeded to tie the hands of Antonia and Miriam, continuing to kneel on his seat. Antonio got out of the vehicle and, taking Antonia by the arm, told her to get down, to which she initially resisted, asking him not to do anything to her, and Antonio forcibly removed her and took her away, towards the part of the trees, while she screamed that she would not say anything to anyone if he let her go, until he stopped seeing and hearing them in the distance. Desiree and Miriam remained behind, asking him what was happening and what they were going to do, and asking him to let them go, to which the deponent told them no, and that he assumed that nothing was going to happen, but that Antonio must be angry. About 10 minutes passed until Antonio returned to the vehicle alone, and re-entering the car he told Miriam to accompany him, that his friend Antonia was sick. At the same time, he took her by the arm and took her out, without remembering if she put up resistance. What he does know is that she was scared, and when he took her out, they took the same direction that Antonio took with Antonia. Before this, he took an object from the glove compartment of the car. The witness did not see what he took, as well as the car keys that were in the ignition, and from the trunk he took another object, assuming that it was a pair of pliers and a pocket flashlight. also. At a given moment, he stopped seeing and hearing Miriam because of the distance. Once they left, the witness told Desiree to sit in front so as not to be so alone, which she did. Passing between the two front seats, Desiree asked him what they were going to do and what was going to happen, given that the other had already taken her two friends. To which the deponent replied that he was not going to do anything to them. What he did was grab her arm to prevent her from running away, and they spent about a quarter of an hour. Desiree asked if he was going to do something to her, and why his friend had hit them. And the witness tried to calm her down until he began to make her propositions about having carnal relations, as well as touching her. She did not respond and did not appear to offer excessive resistance because, the witness supposes, she was afraid that he will hit her. The deponent then lowered the back of Desiree's seat to leave her in a horizontal position, pulled down her pants and panties, and he pulled her sweater and bra up over her breasts, and then lower his pants and underwear to his ankles, mount on her, and have carnal relations, to which Desiree complained because it hurt her. He continued abusing her for 15 minutes. During all this time, the girl was motionless and blocked. He's supposed to be because of fear, so he didn't need to hold her. Once he finished, he returned to his seat and lifted Desiree's seat, while the girl was putting on her clothes, without being able to remember. If the girl tied a knot in the hem of her shirt, immediately afterwards the deponent turned on the radio, and they stayed like that for the 3 or 4 hours. It took Antonio to return. Once Antonio arrived, opened the door, and took Desiree out, and took her away. While the witness told him, "Fuck, you haven't had enough with 2. To which Antonio told him to shut and that it wasn't his concern. The deponent continued in the vehicle for about 15 minutes, until, very nervous, he went outside, staying near the car. While he was outside, he heard from afar how Antonio screamed at Desiree, and he heard how the girl screamed in a terrifying way. That about 15 minutes after leaving the vehicle, he heard 3 gunshots coming from the place where Antonio was. There was about 5 seconds between each shot. Then the witness went to where Antonio was. When he got there, he told him, "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you." When Antonio arrived at the scene, he had the gun in his hand, and his arm was hanging down, and the 3 bodies on the ground. One of them was fully dressed, and the other 2 had their pants and underwear down, and the rest of the body naked. "Remember that none of them had their hands tied," Antonio said. "Quickly, let's get them dressed." And the witness proceeded to do so. Remember the feeling that there was a lot of blood in the bodies. He doesn't remember them tying his hands again, although he remembers that when they moved the bodies to the car, the arms did not hang, so their hands should be tied. Once they were dressed, Antonio told him to go to the car and start it. From there, they went to the Alcásser hut to pick up the pickaxe and a hoe. It took them about half an hour to arrive. After that, they went to the Lambe hut to pick up 2 pieces of carpet that were in the aforementioned house. It took them more or less an hour to arrive. From Alcásser to Lambe, it would be around 6 when they went out again to the place where the bodies were, taking about 20 minutes or half an hour to arrive. And the car was left about 100 meters from the bodies. The witness removed the rear tray of the vehicle. He folded the back seats and spread the largest piece of carpet. Then he took the other piece of carpet and joined Antonio, spreading a corpse on the carpet and using it as a stretcher. They carried the bodies one by one to the car and placed them in the back area. Then Antonio said that he was driving, without the declarant knowing where the bodies were going to be buried. During the journey, the declarant was drowsy and even fell asleep, so he doesn't know how long they were driving. When Antonio stopped, it was still night, and the declarant did not know the place. They went down, picked up the pickaxe and the hoe, and looked for a place to dig the grave. Antonio decided where to do it, and they started digging. It took about 45 minutes. Once the grave was finished, they returned to the car and moved the bodies one by one. They stacked them one on top of the other, and then Antonio took the carpet from the car and put it inside the pit. While Antonio covered the grave with dirt, the deponent returned to the car to put the seats in place, place the tray, and clean any possible stains that could have occurred. Once this was done, he went to the Lambe hut, about 300 meters away, to change clothes, putting on an old tracksuit that was there, and placing all the clothes he was carrying in a plastic bag. Antonio arrived shortly after and did the same. Then they left at daylight towards the Alcásser booth, where Antonio later kept the weapon. He also left the pickaxe and the hoe there. From Alcásser, they went to Buñol, to the landfill, where they threw the bags with the clothes on a bonfire. Later, he went to Cataroja's house, where the declarant stayed, and Antonio left again with the declarant's car. Once in prison, the civil guard asks the judge for permission to visit Miguel Ricard. to clarify the possible whereabouts of Antonio Angles. This took place on February 9, 1993, and days after this visit by the civil guard to the Castellón prison, Miguel Ricard asked to testify again, and this time he gave the version that would be taken as true in the trial and used for his indictment and conviction. After the judge read him the previous statement, Ricard says that it is not true that during the trip to the Cooler nightclub, Antonio carried a firearm. What he carried was a throwing knife that he always had sheathed in his pants, that at no time did he take out said knife, and that when the girls began to scream and complain, once they passed the disco, he told them to turn around and leave them, to which Antonio hit him twice and responded that he was in charge of the car, and later Antonio, to silence the girls, began to punch them, being true what he reported in his previous statement about what happened inside the vehicle, except for the fact that Antonio took out the firearm and that he didn't remember if he hit all the girls at this moment. He doesn't remember if the young women had any broken teeth, but it could be because Antonio hits very hard. But he does remember that the three of their faces were completely bloody, that they did not stop at any factory in the carob field, that they went directly to the Lambe hut that is near the burial, and all of this at Antonio's direction. The deponent did not know what was going to happen, but he says that he imagined it because Antonio told him a few months before that he wanted to abuse 3 young women and kill them later. They stopped the car on the esplanade where there are some beehives. The 5 of them got out and one after the other headed to the hut that is about 400 meters away. The deponent was in front with a flashlight, and Antonio was last with another. The girls asked where they were going, and asked them that they let them go, and Antonio told them to shut up and continue. Once they arrived at the hut, they went upstairs and left a flashlight on. But with the red light, Antonio tied Miriam and Desiree with their hands behind their backs, on a post in the center of the room, standing back to back and sitting on the ground. The 3 girls protested, screamed, and said they wanted to leave. To which an angry Antonio began to hit Miriam and Desiree with a wooden bar, leaving Desiree unconscious, while Miriam asked him not hit her. Meanwhile, the witness held Antonia, who remained standing. Then Antonio picked up Antonia and threw her onto the mattress that was there, while she resisted and defended herself, being at all times reduced by Antonio. Once this was done, Antonio had carnal relations with her, vaginally. If we remember from the autopsy results, Antonia died a virgin. He performed this act for about 10 minutes. While the girl screamed and resisted, he then turned him over and caused the injuries described in the autopsy chapter with a wooden stick. Once finished, Antonio told the girl to get dressed, something that he helped her with, since she was in very bad conditions. Once dressed, he tied her to the post after previously untying Desiree. Antonio stripped her, tearing her upper garments, and he threw her on the mattress, and told the deponent that now it was his turn, and saying that he did not feel like it on this occasion. Antonio told him that either he was with him, or he was sending him for a walk, giving him to understand that he would kill him. At the same time, with a log he hit the declarant 2 or 3 times in the lower back, and then the declarant agreed to abuse the girl. It was approximately 5 minutes until he finished. Antonio remained kneeling next to the mattress, watching as the deponent did so. Antonio said that he had already finished and what a shit man he was. For the short time it had taken, immediately afterwards, Antonio also abused the girl, to which she resisted, and he hit her several times. He spent about 10 minutes doing the same thing he had done to Antonia. After this, Antonio pulled up his pants and helped the girl dress, tying her to the post again. With the 3 tied up, the witness and Antonio returned to the car and head to a bar in Catadau, whose name he does not remember. The name of said bar is the Parador Restaurant Bar, where they ordered 2 sandwiches, a beer, and a bottle of water. Later, they returned to the Lambe hut, where they had dinner and offered water to the young girls, of whom only one wanted to drink. Once they had dinner, Antonio untied Miriam, took off her clothes, and threw her on the mattress, proceeding to do the same thing he had done to Antonia and Desiree, while the deponent held her by the ankles, and Antonio hit her while abusing her. When Antonio finished, he helped her get dressed and tied her to a kind of crossbar that was at the top, leaving her tied standing with her hands slightly raised, and tied to the aforementioned wood. Next, he and Antonio decided to lie down on the mattresses where the girls had been abused, using a piece of carpet as a blanket. Antonio said to the 3 girls that tomorrow they would do more things. The girls did not stop crying and asking to be set free. Antonio, about 5 minutes later, got up nervously, picked up a stick and began to hit the 3 girls hard with it, hitting each one 4 or 5 times, on all parts of the body. Once he finished beating them, Antonio untied Miriam from where she was and tied her again to the post along with her 2 friends. Then he said, "Now you're going to see that this is serious." He went down with the other flashlight to return again about 10 minutes later, showing the girls the gun he had and cutting the cartridge so they could see that it was a real gun. Antonio immediately lay down on the mattress again and fell asleep. The witness also fell asleep. The deponent woke up at dawn and could see that Antonio was already awake. And then, Antonio left without saying where. It took him 3 or 4 hours to return, during which time the witness remained in the hut watching the girls, and in which they begged him to let them free, something he refused because his life was at stake. When Antonio returned, he called the witness to go downstairs, and there he told him that the girls had to be killed so that they wouldn't go to the civil guard, and that he had already made a hole. The witness proposed to let them go free, since they had assured them that they would say that they had been 2 hooded men. Antonio told him that he seemed stupid, saying that if they were still alive, they would give them away. They returned to the upper floor and stayed for approximately 2 hours. At around 3 in the afternoon, Antonio got up saying, "We're leaving." He untied the young women, and they all went towards where the grave was, Miriam being helped by Antonio, since she could not walk well. Antonia and Desiree did walk, although with great difficulty, being helped by the witness. Once they arrived at the grave, Antonio told the deponent to go back to the booth, to take a piece of carpet. Once the witness returned to where the grave was, he saw that the girls realized that the hole was intended for their burial. They begged Antonio to let them go. He replied that he was very sorry, but that he had to kill them so that they would not be accused. The young women began to scream hysterically. Then Antonio, using a kind of wave, with some stones that he had rolled up in a t-shirt, he began to beat them brutally. Antonio himself being hit by mistake one of the times. He continued hitting quite hard for a long time, Antonia losing consciousness due to the beating. Seeing this, one of the girls began to scream hysterically. Antonio took out the knife and stabbed her several times in the back, after which Antonio took out the gun, ready and fired. But no bullet came out, so he cut the cartridge, and the bullet that had not been fired came out and fell to the ground, cut the cartridge again, and fired 3 shots, aimed at each of the young women. Antonia was lying, fainted on her side. The one who was also stabbed was completely face down, and the other remained kneeling with her head and body curled up, and with her hands covering her face, and all at the edge of the grave. After they died, Antonio placed the carpet at the bottom of the hole, throwing one body after another inside, covering them with said carpet and throwing dirt on top, for which Antonio asked the declarant to help him. Once covered with earth, they uprooted bushes and threw them on top to hide the existence of disturbed earth, and Antonio began looking for the shell casings until he found them. Immediately afterwards, they returned to the hut. Antonio went up to the top to pick up anything that might have fallen. They took the flashlights and returned to the car, picking up the pick and the hoe on the way. They went to Albarash's hut to leave the pick and the hoe there, and also to hide the gun in some bushes, and they stayed there. Without it being true what was stated in the previous statement, that they had destroyed the clothes in a landfill, since the deponent did not stain his clothes at all, although he thinks that Antonio did. And since then, the deponent has not gone up to Lombe's hut again. And these are the different statements we have from Ricard. As we see, they are becoming more and more outrageous, and trying to adjust to the injuries that the girls' bodies had. It should be noted that after the psychological examination carried out on Ricard, he was classified as a pathological liar, which gives food for thought, since these statements, and these alone, are the only proofs that both Antonio Angles and Miguel Ricard participated in the crimes, because there is no biological evidence to demonstrate what is assumed here. Just as no blood or other fluids were found, either in La Romana's hut's room or on its mattresses. Mattresses that, on the other hand, were not removed from the hut for analysis, as I always say. Here are the official facts. It is you who have to make your own conclusions.